I certainly, in looking at StrikeGraph as a company and solution, found that there are certain sectors that have been through a lot of this. Finance, for example, has been through a big
Mhm.
compliance journey. And education is just beginning, I think, to adopt these standards and requirements. And so we believe that many more providers and institutions are going to start relying on these trust relationships. What advice would you give to our colleagues here on the call about their compliance journey and where they're starting? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the top advice is on the slide. I mean, for us, by far, the hardest part about even getting to the different certification milestones was documenting the practices we already do. So you can have excellent, for example, change management practice and have all the right kind of workflows and validations, and you're using the systems that manage the technical development, et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes to somebody saying, show me the evidence that 3 months ago when you decided to do this, the right people saw it at the right time and the gates were all opened in the appropriate order and blah, 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 blah. Like, it's super difficult to go back in time and pull all that out in some kind of coherent way that's going to meet the expectations of someone who otherwise doesn't know anything about you necessarily and doesn't have any reason to believe you. So I think the key for me is, if you can, you got to at least have some sort of broad brushstrokes understanding of the different dimensions of the requirements. Something like SOC 2 is pretty extensive. I mean, it touches everything from HR policies and practices to ongoing professional development and training, to code development, to maintaining your server side systems, et cetera, et cetera. And so it touches almost every facet of your organization. And you just sort of have to ask yourself, right? I mean, if somebody asked you the question, why should we believe you when you say that the risk of some random person coming in and just taking your whole system down is extremely low?
Yeah.
And you just need to have some of those things in place so that when you're asked to present the evidence, it's not building it from scratch. It's like, all right, maybe what we have isn't enough or isn't quite right, but at least the thinking behind needing to document that stuff was already there, and you're starting from something rather than
Yeah.
nothing.
One of the things we kind of pride ourselves on, I think this is my product development background, is that each of the steps along the journey that we do with a customer is essentially building towards that outcome, like an auditable cybersecurity practice or a company maturity level. But, early, Rash, we find that a penetration test, a good definition of your controls, a risk assessment, and a description of your system and how you're keeping things secure can help those lighter weight customers like the university adoption,
Right.
get through efficiently. And so this is all that journey and timing. And I think that's why we pride ourselves on having expertise, cybersecurity expertise, in these issues, that can guide each customer a little individually.
Yeah.
One thing you hit on, and I like to tell people too, is that I think people are really terrified this is a massive technological issue, that the standard itself is going to ask you all kinds of things about its technology. But I was really surprised to find out almost half of it is just organizational maturity.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly right. And if you're running a pretty tight ship from sort of like a director of operations
Yeah.
kind of side of things, you will not find that part of the standard to be particularly difficult. But you could see how if things were a little bit chaotic, you would know that right away, and there would be a lot to clean up. Um, I think the other thing that was challenging about all this is that, especially for an org like ours, but honestly, I think any startup type org, any organization that where perhaps a large part of their ethos and structure is to be nimble and to be capable of sort of taking advantage of opportunities as they arise, rather than, you know, becoming a big giant battering ram that just kind of creates those opportunities themselves. Is you do have to find that point where you don't look at these investments in security, in privacy, et cetera, as just lost, right? Lost opportunity, lost income. Because for sure, for much of our history, I mean, it would have been almost impossible for us to justify those expenses. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't pay attention, right? We still needed to make those important, but to get to the level of documentation and paying for the auditing and paying for, you know, the rest of it, like, it just wouldn't have been reasonable. But there is this point, you know, and I think you do need to have that in mind, that you will get there, right? If you're at all successful, you will get there, where you've got to say, all right, this is no longer optional. You've got to sort of take it to that next level. And hopefully that becomes, it's not exactly pro forma, right? I mean, it is, there is real work involved in then taking it to that next level. But again, try to make the size of that step as small as possible. You know, if you just ignore it up till then you're really going to have a hard time.
Absolutely.